Man, it's a fun time right now for basketball fans, and Iowa State won the Big 12 tournament last year, got a 2 seed, respectable Sweet 16 appearance, ran into a really good Illinois team, and then would have had to deal with UConn after that. But you look at what Otzelberger's building there of a defense-first culture and just unselfish offense, toughness, a lot of fun to watch. I'm a fan, and Iowa State will be elite again this year. Christian and Nick with Alec Busse, who covers Iowa State for 247. Alec, thank you so much for joining us. You take a look at Lipsy back, Gilbert back, Milan year 2, Curtis Jones back, and then some nice transfers headlined by Joshua Jefferson from St. Mary's. Can you tell us generally just what the fans are feeling for after a really good season last year, and if people are expecting that, or internally as well in the program, if people are expecting a top 10 team again this year?
Yeah, thanks for having me on, guys. Expectations are super high for this team entering their 2024-2025 season. I think a lot of people outside of the country probably feel like they overachieved last year. And I think even inside of the program, they probably feel like that in a certain sense. But when you return your 4 leading scorers from last season in this era of college basketball with all the roster movement and everything, that certainly inspires confidence about, what is capable for you this upcoming season. And I think, even going further with that, it's one thing to return your top 4 scorers from a year ago, but it's even better to do it when it's 4 guards. A lot of times you're seeing it be a big, but when you have, 2 dynamic all Big 12 guards and Tamin Lipsey and Keyshawn Gilbert returning as kind of the head of your offense, and then you've got 2 good shot makers and Momcilovic and Curtis Jones, like that just kind of spaces everything out. And then they've rebuilt the front court really effectively. You mentioned Joshua Jefferson. They've also added Deshaun Jackson. He was from Charlotte by way of Washington State. And then they also added Brant Chatfield from Seattle, who will provide depth behind Jackson. And Chatfield also played at Washington State before playing at Seattle. So there's a good mix of roster continuity heading into this season with some guys who are entering for the first time, and then players like Gilbert and Jones, as well as Nate Heisey, who comes in for his first year as a transfer. But Gilbert and Jones are in their second year as transfers, and the expectations are really high for this team, and I think they rightfully should be, as they're going to be a preseason top 10 team.
Yeah, I really like that you said that they might have overachieved last season, because if you look at the trend, based off Ken Palm's, Oz has been a coach at Iowa State. They started 113 and ended 43 and 22. In 2023, they started 62, ended 29. And the last season, they started 31, and then they ended 8th. So, I mean, he's been on an upward trend for the first 3 years of his career. And then this season, I have him preseason ranked 3rd. So, I mean, there's nowhere really to go now but down. But it's going to be a great season for Iowa State. I like this team a lot. Let's talk about the main guy coming back. You talked about the guards coming back. The main guy coming back is Tamin Lipsey. I mean, when I look at this guy, obviously, first team all Big 12 defense. The guy can guard any point guard there is. Average almost 3 steals a game, 12 points, 5 boards, 5 assists. He's a junior now. What can we expect from him this season? Like, has he been developing his offensive game even more, or is he still going to be in the same role similar to last year?
I would imagine him to be in the same role as last year, potentially a little bit of a greater influence in the offense than he had a season ago. His offense, his offseason has been pretty limited compared to some other players. He had to undergo an offseason shoulder surgery. He hurt his shoulder in Iowa State's late January, maybe early February loss at BYU, and basically played the rest of the season with this shoulder that would eventually need to be surgically repaired. So he got that left shoulder, if I remember correctly. So he's right-handed. So he was playing hurt for the last month, 2, maybe 3 months of the season, which says a lot about the toughness that he has and that he plays with. But he had to get surgery this offseason, like I said, so he wasn't a part of basically all their spring practices or workouts, and didn't rejoin the team in a full sense for summer practices until the last week or so. But he's been full go for the full fall, which is obviously inspiring about his availability. And everything that I've heard is that he's been incredibly active, incredibly involved throughout the process of getting healthy again. And also that just kind of includes being himself. Like you mentioned how tough he is as a defender, all Big 12 first team defense. You mentioned the 3 steals a game. He's just a complete bulldog. Like what he is or has been in his career is what he's been coming off of his shoulder surgery. And I think that he's going to continue to be those things. And you're hoping to continue to see progression from him as he enters his junior season. Because if you look at a lot of his shooting numbers after his freshman season and compare them to his sophomore season, they were much improved. And if you can continue to improve those as a junior, continue to, be more of a threat as a catch and shoot guy from beyond the arc, get closer to, 36, 37, maybe 38% as a 3-point shooter compared to, I think 34 to 35, maybe 36% he was at last year. You're going to continue to space the floor. And I think that's one thing that this program is trying to continue to improve upon as the expectations continue to rise.
So that was year 3 for TJ. And to be honest, I loved like the Monte Morris teams in that era of Iowa State basketball, but it took me some time. And I understand, that first year at Iowa State shocked everybody with that turnaround, made the tournament, won a couple games in the tournament. And then 2023 got crushed by Pitt in the first round, but still and cooled off towards the end of the season. I think they got cold, but point is, I wasn't really buying it. I was just like, I get that this team can really defend, but like, man, does it make me want to bang my head against the wall watching them play offensively. But last year, like, obviously it was their best season, but like his offensive style, it clicked for me. Like I figured out his thing. Like you had the number 1 defense last year, your top 10 defense 3 years, top 6 in turnover percentage every year. It's very Houston-esque what Kelvin Sampson did, the way that they hard hedge, the way that they have the stable of bigs. It's just energy, rebounding, everything, running you off the 3-point line, making you miss every single 3 you take. What I'm getting at is offensively, like it clicked for me last year. It's all about the ball movement. It's about the unselfishness. People who don't watch Iowa State want to like make Tamin Lipsey be like, oh, he's just one of these other good college point guards. Tamin Lipsey is in a completely other lane than every other really good college point guard because he's orchestrating the offense, but it's not running through him. When you have an off guard like Keyshawn Gilbert averaging 4 assists a game, right? Like that shows you that, and even your bigs were so good at passing. That ball was just zipping around. You're top, like I think you're like 30th in assist percentage. I'm saying I love that. I realized that there was beauty in the fact that their offense looked different. It's not about all these ball screens. It's we're going to cut, we're going to find the open man. And like, we have a bunch of guys who can, and the 3-point percentage wasn't bad at all. You were like 70th. What I'm getting at here is I like the offensive identity, even though it's going to be sometimes clunky at times. Like, do you think the offense can take a step this year? Just bring a guy like Joshua Jefferson, help that out because he in St. Mary's was a very defensive minded team, but he could stretch the floor a bit and everything. And some of these other guys on the bench, that was long winded. But what I'm getting at is we know that defense is going to be elite again, right? Yeah. Offensively, if it looks as it did last year and has this TJ area, what is that next step for this to be a top, 40 offense versus a top whatever?
Yeah, first of all, I love your comparison to Houston because I think I kind of try and make it casually to people about Iowa State. And that is, to me, the mold that TJ wants to build the program within is the Kelvin Sampson idea. You mentioned how the offense has gotten better and better each year under him. If you look at their KenPom offensive efficiency rankings, it's gone up by about 50 to 60 spots. Each of his 3 years was horrible, 171 in his first year. Still pretty bad in the second year, 114, especially for a Big 12 high major program. And then last year, it was mostly between like 45 and 60. Most of the year ended 52nd. It got into the top 40 at one point. You're right. It is a lot of ball movement when it's working well, but a lot of that ball movement comes out of simply just getting the ball in the paint and getting their guards into the paint. You mentioned Keyshawn Gilbert. They played a schedule last year of complete nobodies in the non-conference, which has kind of been something that they've done throughout TJ's tenure. And it's going to change this year because they're going to Maui. They also play Marquette in the Big 12 Big East battle instead of playing DePaul like they did a year ago. DePaul, great basketball program, by the way. They saw Keyshawn Gilbert really emerge. And if you look at, like usage rates, he was actually used more than Tamin Lipsey was for a lot of last season. His overall usage rate was higher than Tamin's. And I wrote a story near the end of the summer about, those second-year transfer guards across the country. We've seen their production just like skyrocket. And I think Keyshawn Gilbert's success this year could be a big indicator of how good Iowa State can be offensively. Keyshawn, in comparison to Tamin, is probably a more dynamic ball handler. He's a better athlete. He's more gifted vertically in terms of his ability to play at and above the rim. He's quicker laterally. He's just more dynamic. I'm not trying to compare him to this player, but if you watch him play and the way they attack things, it's very Jaden Ivey-esque at Purdue. Again, not comparing the players because Jaden Ivey was a top, I think, 5 pick by the Pistons coming out of Purdue. And Keyshawn is maybe a second round at best pick. I think the Athletic had him projected at the end of the second round at one point this summer. But the way they just put their head down, they attack, they started to make open shots. Those are things that they both do. And I think that Keyshawn is very important in their ability to continue to accelerate and improve their offense. But it's also because he has the ability to kick to guys like Milan Momcilovic who can make shots and create his own shot at 6'8". Curtis Jones was a great catch and shoot guy last year for them, and I would anticipate him being that again this year. You bring in Nate Heisey, someone who transfers from Northern Iowa. You expect him to see his shooting numbers increase a little bit as he has less pressure on him to handle the ball as much as he did with the Panthers. And then you combine Taman, who orchestrates all of it, like you said really well there, Christian, around bigs who can all pass it, especially Deshaun Jackson. I don't know how much of his film you've watched. Joshua Jefferson. Those two guys can get it and pass it and get it and move it. And Jefferson's shooting numbers are really kind of a mirage. Like in that conference, he was really bad, but in the first couple of weeks of West Coast Conference play at St. Mary's, he was really good. So it's hard to understand how good of a shooter he actually is. But I think you would continue to expect the offense to improve. Do I think it's going to be, a top 15, top 20 KenPom offense? Probably not, but can it be top 35, top 30-ish? Yeah, I think it can be. And if you combine that with what is going to be one of the country's 2 to 3 best defenses, because that's what it's been throughout TJ's tenure, it's going to be a team that is going to compete in the top 10 nationally all season long.
You talked about the schedule a little bit. TJ is still scheduling some sub 300 Q4 opponents there. I had to take a look. There's still some in there. He loves blowing these cupcakes out. I like it too. I like watching it. Fun games. But just talking about like what Chris said from year one to now, Otz is a coach who, he does more with less, in my opinion. And now, like last year was like the building block. He got in like Gilbert, Jones, top talented players. Now he's bringing in an even more talented crop of 4 players. Like, that's why I'm really excited for this offense, and it'll make more strides and get better. Like, he just has more talent now to go with that elite defense. I guess my one concern is, this is a defensive question, just do you think that Jackson and Jefferson are solid rim protectors? Because if you're going to be pressing and like getting up at people, you have to have the back line of rim protection. They had that last season, I thought, and Jones and Ward. Can those two guys replicate that and be good at that?
Yeah, they definitely don't have a Hassan Ward level athlete to protect the rim like they did a year ago. I would have argued that Hassan Ward was actually their best big last year. And if you remember correctly, he was their starting 5 at the beginning of the season before he had to miss almost 6 weeks, I think it was, maybe a little bit less than that with an ankle injury or a foot, something like that. I think it was a foot, something in his lower leg. And then Robert Jones kind of took over the starting role, and they were winning so much that Otz decided to kind of keep the rotation the same there. They don't have a Hassan Ward level rim protector this year. Instead, I think you've got really, really physical bigs with Jackson, who has a little bit more skill, and then Chatfield, who is just kind of been raved about as like a really physical kid, bruiser on both the offensive and defensive ends. And I think that aligns a lot with what Rob Jones did for them a season ago. And it's so hard to get into the paint against this team, just like it is against Houston, because of the way they cover ball screens. They blitz everything, and they switch, and they move around so well away from the ball that it becomes really hard for teams to get into the paint. And when they are into the paint, they all just like flock to the rim. And they don't have the elite shot blocker, but there's so many people there that it's still hard to get a look off. And they're a pretty good rebounding team as well. That is one of my concerns as well there, Nick, though, is that they don't have someone who is going to block a ton of shots. But I think they have enough guys who can maybe alter shots at the rim, which I think is, it's not something that you can see in a stat book. It's not something that shows up on a synergy chart for a player, but it is something that it does go notice to ball knowers, if we're going to make a ball knowing joke.
Let's talk a little more about Deshaun Jackson. You mentioned his passing ability. I see he had games with 9 assists, 7 assists. This is a big man. So He's clearly skilled. He's making the jump from the AAC, but he's been a high major player before. Is the expectation that, Jefferson is a 4? So, when Nick talks about that rim protect, this is a big role. Like, is this a guy that can, in the Big 12, be a beast on the offensive glass, protect the rim? And do you think that passing ability is what kind of drew this staff to bringing him into being a fit here at Iowa State?
Yeah, they love his passing ability, and they really like his overall offensive skill. He's a much more skilled player than Rob Jones was a season ago, and I think that that's just another example of the progression that Iowa State's program has probably made throughout the last offseason, throughout even the last year, is just improving the overall talent and skill set that Otz has acquired for the team to play with. His passing ability is certainly at the top of the list. He started at the high major level at Washington State, which obviously, not the greatest program in the country. Kyle Smith did a good job there at the end of his tenure, getting the Cougars to the NCAA tournament. And he entered the portal after his stint at Washington State, and I believe he was going to transfer to Texas Tech, but he ended up not getting cleared to transfer to Texas Tech. I believe he was diagnosed with lymphoma or leukemia, one of those two kind of blood cancers. And he's fine now. He's fully healthy now, has gotten through all of that. But that kind of led to him having to transfer down to Charlotte. And then he had his best, most productive season in college basketball with the 49ers before coming back to the Big 12 level. I think he's a great fit for what they want to do. I mentioned his physicality, his passing ability. He's not someone who I think that they're going to want to see shoot it a lot from the perimeter, but I do think he's someone who can kind of handle it, can drive a little bit if you watch his film. I don't know how much that'll translate to the Big 12, but he's a really good passer. And with how much you mentioned, they like to cut away from the ball, Christian, I think that's something that'll play really well into his skill set because you can kind of run some fun, like pick and pop things, not necessarily pop as in shoot, but pick and roll kind of things or pick and pop where, guard will give it to Jackson in a handoff type situation. And then you'll have a guard baseline cut for an easy layup with Jackson getting an assist. Things like that, I think you're going to see Iowa State utilize a good amount this upcoming season.
Real quick, that was misinformation. He had 7 assists. He did not have a 9-assist game. 7 assists was his most assist game. Go ahead, Nick. My bad.
Yeah, so I guess the more we talk about this roster, I mean, the depth is evident. Like it's a good they have a good team, but like who is going to be in the starting 5? Because I guess I'm kind of like thinking in my head like he could go a few different ways with the starting 5. So who do you predict?
Yeah, to me, it is no doubt going to be Jackson. I think Chatfield gives them the physicality that they crave coming off of the bench, which I think is something that excites them. And then they have a redshirt freshman in JT Rock, who they brought in from South Dakota coming out of high school. And he is someone who didn't play at all last year, like I said, redshirted. They kind of indicated to me in my conversations with sources around the program that they think he's still at least a year away, but he'll have an opportunity to work his way into a role off of the bench. In the spring, when I last talked to the staff about where Rock was at, they were kind of like, yeah, we still kind of think he's probably a year away from being ready to contribute. He's someone who could also factor into the starting 5 spot, but I expect Jackson to start, and then Chatfield will provide depth as like the 6th, 7th, maybe 8th man coming off of the bench.
Who else
alongside Jefferson, Momchilovic, Gilbert, Taman?
Yeah, I would project those to be the starting 4. It maybe. It depends on what they decide to do with Milan. There's an opportunity for him to potentially start at the 4, which would provide more offensive spacing. And if they do that, then you're probably starting Curtis Jones as well, and you would be starting Lipsey, Gilbert, Jones, Momcilovic around Jackson. That's probably their best 5, but I don't know if that's what they want to do because Jones was so good coming off of the bench for them a season ago as their 6th man, and he would often check in the games before that under-16 timeout. So I wouldn't be surprised if they keep Milan at the 3 and they play Jefferson at the 4 and they bring Jones off of the bench still.
It's a good problem to have.
Go ahead. Yeah,
it's a great problem to have. They have really good depth, and it's positional depth, right? They understand their roles and they understand where guys want to play them. And you hear so much about like positionless basketball and the ability to have versatility. I think that's great, but at the same time, if you can have identified roles and an understanding of what players are supposed to do and expected to do when they're on the court, you can kind of overcome not having the elite positional size that I think Iowa State kind of lacks right now.
any of these guys we haven't mentioned that you expect to play a role here? Are they more just young depth pieces? Caden Fish, no, I don't even want to try. Andrew Satias.
Yeah, no, just indrusitis is how it goes. Kind of sounds like an illness. He's someone who it does sound like an illness, does it not? It does to me.
It does.
He's someone who was a top 100 recruit, played at Brewster Academy. He could play a similar-ish role to Momcilovic in much smaller minutes. A good shot maker, good offensively. They need to see him improve defensively before he's able to do those things. The one name I guess I would mention is Nate Heisey. He transfers in from Northern Iowa, like I said. If they decide to start Curtis Jones at the 3 and then move Momcilovic down to the 4, I think you see Heisey kind of step into a greater role as like the 6th or 7th man. He had really good numbers at Northern Iowa last year, and I would expect him with 2 years of eligibility remaining, I believe, to kind of be able to really facilitate a good role for himself off the bench as a shot maker, as a potential facilitator, and he has good size at 6'5".
I have one last question, Chris, and this is like kind of a hypothetical for you, Alec, but like the saying is like defense wins championships, right? And they were number 1 in defense last season, but I went back and like looked at the terminals to see how good the offenses were that they lost to. In 2022, Miami was 19. 2023, Pittsburgh was 29. And 2024, last season, Illinois was 3. So 3 top 30 offenses. So this season, really, like, I guess my question is, do you believe that like defense wins championships, or do you think that this offense must like take a step forward and like probably finish like top 25 to really like push and get further in the tournament?
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting dynamic about the whole like defense wins championships thing, because if you look at like KenPom ratings last year, I think of the top 5 offenses, I think all 5 of them made it to the Sweet 16, and I think 4 of them made it to the Elite 8, and 3 of them made it to the Final Four, because UConn, Bama, Purdue were all in the Final Four. Illinois was in the Elite 8, and then Gonzaga was in the Sweet 16, and they were the 5th offense as well. So I think that there's truth in the idea that you have to be really good offensively to win, because at the end of the day, you have to be able to put the ball in the bucket. But defense is still really important too. Like UConn was 4th nationally in defense. Purdue was 12th looking at it right now. Like that's still really good. I do think that their offense needs to be improved if they're going to make a run to the Final Four, because I just think you're going to run into a team that, like they did last year, that might have a 1st-round pick on their team, or might have just overall more talented players. And I kind of think that's what happened to them in the Sweet 16 last year. Like Terrence Shannon Jr. was, a no doubt all Big Ten, All-American player. The off-the-court things didn't kind of affect that stuff, and turned into a 1st-round pick for the T-Wolves. They didn't have a great matchup for him. So if they can kind of progress offensively this year and get to that top 25 level, like you said, Nick, I think a Final Four becomes within reach for them. And obviously it all becomes matchup based. Like you can get really lucky and you can get a lot of favorable matchups on your way to the Sweet 16 and Elite 8, the Final Four. And if you do that, then I think this team is certainly capable of getting to that kind of level. And if they do, it'll be the first time getting to a Final Four in the program's modern history.
Alec, you've been a great guest. Thank you for coming on, talking Cyclones with us. The defense is so fun to watch if you're a sicko like us. And I know the fans' names are definitely appreciative of that. And offensively, there was a time last season, I think it was in February, where they were the worst offense in the Big 12 for a stretch. And it's like,
it was
they
really
were
bad.
still playing at such a high level
for like 3 weeks. Yeah, it was really bad.
But like I said, I think there's beauty in what he's doing offensively. I get it now, and I like it. You're right. It's about paint touches and playing off that. They've got enough guys who can make shots. And if, a guy like Momcilovic or Gilbert can take another step forward just with their bag, with their skill, it can make the difference. So thanks again so much for joining us, Alec. You were great.
Appreciate it, guys. Thanks for having me on.